First item on the agenda is the review and approval of the November 8th meeting notes. Can I get a motion on the November 8th meeting notes?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of the November 8th meeting as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The next item is feedback and review from recent public forums. Over the last month, we went with the architect and the honors project manager to the 3 schools that we're talking about renovating, and we had what I'm going to call neighborhood meetings with the neighbors, and thank you, some of you are here this evening, and then, by the way, if you haven't signed in, please let us know you are here. And so I'm going to have Scott go over some of what we heard, and then open it up to discussion for the committee. So, Scott, if you want to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. I would say that having done this for many, many years, it's important to point out that when we went out to the neighborhoods at the 3 elementary schools, the turnout was exceptional. We had really strong participation. We had a number of neighbors there to talk about the area and give us more advice and input on how things flow in the neighborhood, some of their concerns. So it was extremely helpful. And then tonight, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we heard, but certainly not trying to be comprehensive, because there was an incredibly strong turnout by the building committee, some city councilors. So I know that you all are very familiar with the comments, and I'm probably going to leave a lot of room for you to add some of the things you heard and not try to sort of steal all the thunder, because you guys were there. You participated. To your credit, really strong participation on the building committee side too. So I'll summarize maybe some things that surprised us and some interesting things we heard. I don't want anybody to think that it's intended to be comprehensive, because I would encourage all of the building committee members to speak to things specifically, and we don't always all hear the same things either, interestingly enough. So I'll jump right to the Conniff slide. We went through all of the, and we've got them in this slide deck for tonight, but we went through not all of the options, we went through several of the options that the building committees talked about, but we spent most of our time in the neighborhood meetings talking about the preferred option. And at all of the sites, Conniff, Lowell, and the Hosmer, there was certainly a lot of strong feedback and desire to protect and preserve green space. We heard it over and over. So without saying the exact same thing at all 3 of the sites, there was certainly an interest in doing everything possible at all of the sites to preserve green space. Specifically at the Conniff and the Lowell, we were surprised at how strongly the neighborhood felt about allowing parking to occur in the neighborhood in lieu of, and on neighborhood streets, in legitimate spaces on neighborhood streets, in lieu of creating more parking on the specific sites themselves. We first heard it at the Conniff, where a number of people from the neighborhood, a number of abutters, indicated that they certainly didn't mind seeing teachers, staff, visitors park on their streets if that meant that the parking on site did not have to expand. So, and then certainly when we went to the Lowell, we heard the same thing. I would say at the Lowell that there was even more emphasis by the neighborhood in terms of indicating that they felt that, for example, George Street was available for parking a lot during the day. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that site, and that there might not be the need to create a lot of additional parking there. At the Cuniff specifically, a number of people spoke to concerns regarding the fact that even though the addition may provide, and the renovations may provide a good and a new, essentially, educational environment, and would be a good thing educationally, they sort of emphasized their desire to see a little bit more of a rethinking of the entire site, in that they felt like as a result of the 1950s building, the 1990s addition, and now yet another addition, that the efficiency of the building's use of the entire site was being lost, and that net green space was being lost, and they encouraged a rethinking of that. Now, we obviously indicated that you can't sort of solve that unless you remove more of the existing building, but there were a number of people from the Cuniff meeting that spoke to that need for being as efficient as possible, and maybe considering other alternatives that didn't end up taking up as much of the site in that regard, particularly, again, the green space and with parking there. I'm going to pause on just the Cuniff, Chairman Sedaris, if you think it's appropriate, and allow any of the committee members to add anything specifically related to the Cuniff that they may have heard.
Does anyone want to add anything or ask any questions about this so far? Anyone from the audience have any questions so far? Please stand up and go to the microphone. Sorry.
Scott, is what you're showing now the preferred plan?
It is, yes.
This is the preferred plan. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, the preferred plan that we reviewed with, that was last reviewed with the building committee and that we shared with the neighborhood is this plan. And we talked about, at the Cuniff, I would say that there seemed to be less concern, at least less verbalized concern with regard to drop-off and pickup. There seemed to be an acceptance that in the morning and the afternoon, there was going to be some congestion at that site, but that they didn't want that to drive decisions that we were making on the site. For example, there was someone who spoke up and indicated that they would prefer less parking on site and not doing a dedicated drop-off lane on site versus just keeping the drop-off on Warren Street, maybe expanding it slightly, but they didn't feel like creating more paved surface and more driving surface and taking away more green space on the site was going to be an effective way to resolve what they felt like was a relatively minor inconvenience a couple of times a day.
Tom.
Scott, there was one gentleman, and I forget the term he used, but he talked about building over the parking space. Could you, and I think there was some reasons why that would not be a great idea. Could you elaborate on that?
He suggested that anything we could do to build over, he actually used the term, I believe, cantilever, but I think he essentially meant build over a parking area, would free up more space below. I think that as he continued to explain his position, he went on to say that if, in the best of all worlds, if we were to explore a building on this site that had some parking at a first floor level and then had a second floor going over that, that it would be a more efficient use of the site. At first, I thought he was talking about subterranean below-ground parking. He clearly understood that was cost prohibitive, but he did go on to say that anything we could do in terms of a scheme that at least considered parking on the lowest level and built a second floor over that would be a benefit. I think his main focus, because the same gentleman who was, very thoughtful and seemed, very conscientious about the efficiency and use of the site, also said that, if we could consider a project that built new construction near the most quiet abutters, and he was referring to the cemetery, that it would be a very effective use of the site, so.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Lindsay.
I just wanted to comment that I think part of the reason why Cuniff is less concerned about the congestion around drop-off as well is that that school isn't surrounded on four sides by neighborhood like the other schools are. And there is sort of a quiet neighbor side and a relatively main road that goes by it on one side where people are being dropped off. So I feel like it's a little bit less disruptive than some of the other schools. And so while I value their positive feedback about green space and they're unconcerned about parking, I think it's more because of the site, not because the neighborhood parking is better there, possibly.
John?
Yeah, I would just add, I'm not sure that if the statistics would support this, but I have a sense, my daughter went to the Cuniff when I lived over in that area, and I have a sense that there's a high percentage are walkers that walk to the school, probably a little bit more maybe than the Hosmer, I would guess, certainly than the Hosmer. Smaller school, kids live closer by.
I think that is correct, John.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Scott? Let's go to the next one.
Let's just talk a little bit about
Peter wanted to say.
Some of the options we looked at earlier.
the option that we spoke to at the Hosmer School is the most recent evolution of the addition renovation to the Hosmer, and includes, as you may recall, a substantial addition in this location, and then renovation of the existing gymnasium, dining space, and then the preschool, pre-K existing facility, and then some expansion of that preschool, pre-K facility. There was, at the Hosmer, and again, I'm not trying to capture every single comment, but in general, there was, again, a focus on preserving green space. There was concern, even though we did explain that this particular scheme had evolved out of a number of schemes that took up much more of the green space. There was still concern about the encroachment on the existing green space on the Hosmer site. There was concern about the size and magnitude of this new parking area on the Hosmer site. There was an interest, and we explained that the building committee has in fact discussed this, but there was an interest in evaluating how much parking could be captured if the lot to the west was in fact paved and integrated into the rear circulation drive to the building and the parking spaces that you see in this location, and then a lessening of the parking in this zone. There was a general feeling, as this committee has also supported all along, that less parking is better as long as the needs of the school and the neighborhood can be met. I think at Hosmer, we again encountered a similar feeling that from the neighborhood and the butters, maybe a little bit stronger at the Hosmer with regard to whether maintaining that existing building and attempting to expand it was the right solution, and a number of, I think there were at least 2 different people that commented, and again, this was nothing new to the building committee. It's been discussed in this committee, but at least a couple of the neighbors commented that that if we weren't trying to maintain that existing building, that a lot of other possibilities better possibilities might exist on the Hosmer site. And we did explain that we had explored everything from the possibility of renovating the Z-shaped building to various renovation addition options, to new construction options elsewhere on the site. But that right now, the approach was to keep some portion of that existing building. There was discussion about just sort of general circulation and drop-off around the site, and as the building committee has heard in their previous meetings, there was concern about really evaluating the volume of that drop-off and making certain that whatever the final solution is, is the best possible solution for creating the smoothest drop-off and as much drop-off area as possible, and determining specifically where those locations would be, and making sure that they could be accommodated, whether that would be on the Winthrop side or the Concord Road side of the site. There was some input, and again, it wasn't new to the building committee members, but the neighborhood did reiterate that in terms of this playfield area, that there are a lot of parents that utilize it in a situation where they have children of varying ages, and the ability to have as much playfield area for those ongoing activities, while a smaller sibling can be on the playground area, and it can all be monitored by that parent. There was overall just a lot of interest in protecting the existing playfield, playground, hard court area on Mount Auburn Street as can possibly be saved. So a lot of people provided feedback in that regard. With that, I will again pause, and certainly, again, that doesn't capture every detail. If there are building committee members who feel like there are some specific points that should be reiterated, I, through the chairman, would suggest that happen.
Comments and questions from the committee at this point on the Hosmer? Anyone from the public on the Hosmer? Yes, Peter. Just come up to the microphone, because we'll get yelled at if you don't speak in the mic.
Very sorry. Would you mind if I go back quickly on the
Sure.
cutoff?
No
I just had a
problem.
quick question. Thanks for all the explanation and adjustments. Is there a now I look at that, it looks like it's switched. Is the field kind of similar to where it is now, or is it
The
with a
field.
small diamond? Is that give or take close to it?
The field is in a similar location than it is now, but during the discussions with this committee, and certainly at the neighborhood discussions, we pointed out that we're not trying to imply that it's the same size. This building is clearly projecting into that. For example, this is the back of the existing classroom wing. So this addition is taking up, you could say 40 to 50% of that back area. And this has been slid up to show the size of that T-ball infield. But keep in mind that this area is now sloping up. This is not a flat area of the site. So it is a smaller play area than the one that exists there now.
Okay. And just my question, because my main focus was the multi-purpose court. Is there any area up there, like we had, when I went up there with the principal a few years ago, we had talked about between the first base line and the cemetery, obviously having a retaining wall. Like at 552 Main Street, we put a smaller court, but at least it's something. I don't know if there was a possibility somewhere in that green space in one of the corners to put that there, because, I think it might be an opportunity, but thank you.
I think it would be candidly a little challenging. I think you could pull a retaining wall over there and get some additional usable area, but I don't think it would be sufficient enough to introduce a play court like that. But I think your comments were echoed by a number of the abutters in the neighborhood in general, in terms of, is there some way to look at this in a different way to capture more play area, more play space, not take up the existing green space, not have to have more parking in this zone. They felt very strongly about that, so I don't want to not emphasize the fact that they did feel very strongly about that.
Yes.
Scott, may I just ask, what is to the right in the front off the street there? It looks like a little parking lot or something?
Elodie, are you referring to this area?
Yes, please.
That's the existing playground.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an existing
Thank you.
playground there.
Any other questions or comments on this or the Hosmer? John? Lisa, sorry, step right up.
Thank you. My name's Lisa Feltner, and in general, I was wondering if there's any neutral or gain or deficit in open space between the plans and preferred schematics versus what we were looking at. And as far as the Hosmer goes, I didn't know between the existing to remain and the new entry. I know there's has been discussion about that potential courtyard green space, and just to let you know, I'm hearing concerns about how much shaded or how that's going to feel, and if maybe this detail will come later, but if that might be also a winter garden, or I don't know how large an area that is that would let sunlight in. And just confirming that these pages marked prefer schematic are not all the other options, right? That like Hosmer, new option D is not the preferred.
Correct, that is
schema-
correct.
Okay,
Yep.
and same for Cuniff, it's not E, et cetera.
Correct. Only the preferred, only the one
First.
after the preferred schematic statement, right?
Okay, thank you.
I think that it's obviously going to vary at each site. I think at the Cuniff, certainly, it's very easy to point out that there is a net loss of green space. I don't know that we have that exact percentage, but you can see that we're going from an existing building footprint that includes the dotted red line in the existing building to the full footprint that you see as part of the full build-out on the site. And you can see that as part of the rearrangement and to try to capture a little more parking, we've also taken up what is currently green space in this zone of the site. I'm not sure you could see that better on some of the others, but essentially we don't have the math. But I think it's the reason the neighborhood was somewhat concerned is because it is starting to be a build-out that takes up a lot of that space. With regard to the gardens, that entire area is not a garden space. It is a large area, and we'll be working with the administration and those who are involved in that program to make sure that the gardens that do go in that area, or whatever area we ultimately decide, that we're thoughtful about their placement and the solar orientation. So there's certainly a lot more thought that has to go into that program and those amenities whenever we decide the specific direction we're going in.
Any other questions on this? Go to the Lowell.
At the Lowell neighborhood meeting, I would emphasize again that we had an excellent turnout. There was a lot of discussion on, without meeting with the neighborhood and sort of understand, and this is the value of meeting with those who actually live there, but without meeting with them and getting some of their feedback, one might think that the introduction of 20 or 30 parking spaces on that site would not be a huge compromise, but certainly there were many neighborhood residents who made a case for not doing any additional parking spaces on the site if it involved carving out existing green space. For example, there's a lot of conversation around, and we explained clearly to the neighborhood that the building committee had not made a decision with regard to how much parking or where parking might be added on the Lowell site, and we explained that the building committee had explored everything from small parking lots in this zone to only perpendicular parking on George Street, or to possible perpendicular parking on the upper end of George Street, to potentially a small remote lot off of the upper end of George Street, but it was all in the interest of exploration and that no decision had been made. But I felt like there was a relatively strong statement made to not do any additional parking on the site. And even Vinnie did a nice job explaining that as a result of doing some additions on the site, that there was going to be some displacement of some existing parking spaces. And that led to a discussion about whether the streets surrounding the Lowell School could, in fact, accommodate additional parking without the need to create those spots on site. And there were a number of people on the lower end of George Street who spoke up for the accommodations that could be made for parking during a typical day along the street there, and that the spaces that do exist along the street there are very rarely fully occupied. And then I believe it was someone from the upper end of George Street commented that the same was true of the upper end of George Street. So without putting words in their mouth, I would say that there seemed to us to be an overall feeling that the neighborhood could accommodate additional parking needs without the need to do additional spots on site. Now, there was some question about whether, towards the end of the meeting, there was some question about whether a reconfiguration of Lowell Ave combined with removing part of the Lowell playground could perhaps provide more additional spaces close to the school without taking away too much of the Lowell playground. I would remind the building committee that that is something we looked at, not in a lot of detail, but we did look at it, and we decided at the time we didn't think it was a good idea because it did take up so much of the Lowell playground. It would require a retaining wall along that edge, and I think that we could certainly do a little sketch around that, but I think if anybody saw how much of the playground gets taken away as part of executing additional parking there, it would look less attractive than it does just sort of talking about it as a conceptual idea, but we could certainly diagram that moving forward. There was conversation about the additions. I think on the west side addition, there was some concern expressed with regard to the potential of it blocking the current sunlight or views to the Carlton Terrace area. And so there's some concern expressed about that addition. On the east side, I don't believe that anybody spoke specifically to the obstructions that would be created on the east side, but there was some mention of the addition on the west side. We didn't bring this up, but I just, as I look at this site plan, just as a reminder to the building committee, and we did discuss this at the time that we were doing various addition options. On this on this west side, the existing building, as it exists now, does fall well outside of the required property setback or the zoning bylaw setback on this corner. When we were doing the addition, and I'm not trying to defend it, I'm just saying this as a reminder, when we were doing the addition, we tried to stay within that setback, and that's what the dotted line there is showing. But there was some concern about the size, mass, et cetera, of an addition on that side of the building. We talked about the courtyard, and we talked a lot about maintaining the view corridors up to the building. We did show the perspectives from down on Orchard Street and then moving up George Street, and there, I think everybody was in agreement that the idea of preserving the existing facade and appearance of the sort of historic buildings, historic Lowell School on the hill was important, and not that we expected any resistance to that, but I think there was agreement of the importance of that. We did explain that the current drop-off pattern, although it may cause a lot of congestion in the morning and the afternoon, is probably, if it's executed correctly, still any traffic engineer would probably tell you that one-way drop off and move on is probably still the most expeditious way to move vehicles through the neighborhood. There were a number of abutters on streets north of this particular site area that, as a result of the way the traffic stages coming up to Lowell Ave, had concerns and expressed concerns about trying to do as much as possible to make sure that those cars that are further north in that staging line don't park and get out as a result of becoming impatient about being able to drop their children at the school. So there's a lot of concern about that. Building committee made it clear that there's some things sort of out of the purview of the building committee, but that we would certainly be conscious of that and do everything we could in terms of the drop-off curb, the available area, the sidewalk area, to create a zone that would allow that to occur as efficiently and expeditiously as possible. So with that, I will pause and also ask Mr. Chairman if you would want to allow the building committee to come.
Okay, questions from the building committee. Lindsay?
I have hesitations about calling any parking plans on or near this site additional parking, because what we're trying to do is find a place to put the teachers and staff and people who work at the school from the lots that we're taking away. So if you don't have any of those parking options on the school, then you've eliminated all possibilities of where people can work, and we're increasing the size of the school. And so I feel like the idea that George Street has openings in various places and stuff, I don't know that that's enough spaces to support every car that currently is parking on site that we're going to displace with building. And to say that there's only, Scott, how many cars can park on Lowell, right? How many spaces? Like 2 handicap and maybe like 10? It's not many.
Yeah, I think it's about 10. I think you're right.
So to say that the Lowell School has 10 parking spaces for parents, traveling staff, people who work there, everybody, and then everyone else parks in the neighborhoods, I think that we should avoid calling it additional parking on site and maybe call it replacement parking or call it any parking on site. I don't know. I mean, I'm worried about, I understand people's concerns about changing the site at all in terms of parking, but I also don't think that the committee should take any of the options off the table or stop looking for a good option for that, because we can't have none.
I think that's a really fair point. It is not additional parking. I think that, anytime you introduce new parking in a new area, it's perceived as additional parking. There wasn't parking there before. But I think Vinnie did a really nice job when that question came up of explaining that we're not really looking for additional parking, we're looking to maintain what's on the site now. So, and we did explain that the diligence shown by the building committee is not a result of your desire to in any way remove any green space. It's just an attempt to try to keep the same amount of, keep the site neutral in terms of parking moving forward.
One of the concerns that I would have on the parking is, this is the school that we've decided to add students to, and if we park all these teachers on the neighborhood streets, the town does have a 2-hour parking limit, and if somebody parks in a bad place in front of a driveway and a neighbor can't get out and they call the police will ticket every car on that street. So everybody's going to pay the price. So I do think that this is an area where we have to refine the parking situation a whole lot more before we go any further, because I don't think that we necessarily can take all these parking spaces away and say, let's burden the neighborhood with these parking spaces. So I do think that as we move forward, we're going to have to continue to look at refining how we're going to park on the site.
Just going back to a comment I made earlier, there were at least a couple, there may have been more, individuals from the neighborhood who were talking about this Lowell playground and indicated that, for example, even if we did have to take a significant portion of it, if there was a wall or a netting or a fence set up so that it was still possible to hit down that right field line, but that netting kind of defined the boundary of that it might be acceptable to take that much area. So our initial reaction to feeling like you might not want to take as much area out of that as would be required might be premature. I mean, we might need to go back and study that idea of a parking zone along Lowell Ave. It'd be interesting to hear if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Tom?
What I heard was regarding the parking, and I heard the lower end of George Street really not to touch it, they were fine. What I also heard was that there really wasn't no big concern about, on the, I guess, the upper George Street, is trying to put something in that area. I also agree with the additional staffing that we're going to be putting on, and I agree it's replacement parking. I think we need to put some additional parking, not additional replacement parking, that we're taking from I guess, the East Addition. However little parking that is, I think we need to at least replace that somewhere on the site. I'm more in line to do it off George Street up near where that basketball court is, and if it needs pushing the basketball court a little bit in, I would recommend doing that. I do think we should also take a look at expanding the Lowell Ave section a little bit, just because of how tight that is before it kind of curves open. But those are my comments.
Paul?
I'm a neighbor of the school, and I witness the drop-off and pickup every day, most days. And this is not a complaint. Trust me, I bought a house next to a school. I know what I was getting into. But the pickup in the afternoon is probably more hectic than the drop-off. But there's parents that park on the street. They bring their kids up and down Carlton Terrace to get in and out of the building. So if we were to put staff in those spots where the parents are coming to drop off or pick up, where would that put the parents for drop-off and pickup? So I think we do need some parking on site, because it's just going to push everybody farther back or out into Orchard Street, which would be really, really messy.
Stacy?
I presented the slides this afternoon to the staff, and they have a big They were a different group of people that really weren't heavily represented last week. Only 2 teachers came to the forum. They were quite alarmed today by the parking, and they said that the biggest problem is that the neighbors park on the street where it's York Ave. Like I was thinking, some of those areas in the morning, they're not cleared out of those spaces to allow the teachers to get in them in the morning. So it's kind of like a timing situation. When you, as the day progresses, there are a lot more spaces available on George and York, but in the first thing in the morning, there are actually not as many. So they were just thinking, depending on when you're looking and what you're trying to get, it changes during the daytime. So they were thinking, we're going to be really far away from the school, and it was a concern, and they asked me to advocate for some parking.
It's a good point in terms of the timing, because some of those, and certainly we're not questioning any of the commentary, but the timing of availability is going to be a critical issue, and so that's a good point.
One last point that I thought of, trying to get as much additional parking toward where the gym is, because because of the expansion, you're taking some of that small spaces, they're not really spaces, but we've got to remember that, and I know it's only twice a year, but there's elections held at this site, and taking some of that parking even around as close as that is going to be problematic for especially people who are elderly or handicapped who are trying to go to the election polls.
Anyone else on the committee? John?
I would just, I think I would echo a little bit what I think Tom said earlier in terms of, kind of, definitely we need to find parking on site, but, Upper George may be an option, but Scott, you spoke to this, you felt the expanding Lowell a little bit and continuing along that line there, you saw that as less viable?
I think that it sort of depends on what your priorities are, and it's always good for us to hear the feedback. If in fact that it was felt that it would not be a huge hardship to lose part of the Lowell playground, opening this up as more of a boulevard with double-loaded parking and maybe a separate drop-off lane might do a lot to help both the congestion and the parking. It would certainly eat into that existing Lowell playground area, but it might end up overall being a significant benefit to the site. So I would just say, we could take a look at some proposed layouts for modifying that area and see if the committee felt like they were attractive options.
Well, I was even, this would be, add not that many spaces, but some would be just actually not to have, you're talking about a double.
Right.
Double, just a single, continuing the single on beyond what it is, maybe that would add, 10 spaces or something, 10 or 12 spaces maybe, something like that.
Yeah, I think we have a sketch for that, and it was because that's a steep grade going up there, it was an enormous amount of work for, I think it was about 6 spaces. But that might prove worthy too. So I think that it feels like looking at some different scenarios on what we might do with Lowell Ave might be valuable.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, Lindsay.
About the 6 spaces, it would be so cost prohibitive to put a retaining wall for just a couple spaces there. I feel like that's a rough option to think about. I'm kind of curious, and Peter, you might actually know the answer to this. Who plays on that field? Like, are the kids young enough that you can lose that much of the outfield and it's still usable? Because it seems like you actually really knock down the age of kids that can play there. By taking out that much outfield space. So I'm just curious, I don't know who gets scheduled there.
Thank you very much, and thank you for asking me. So, and this is where everything is kind of intermingled. So right now, the varsity softball team plays at O'Connell, and that potentially could be changing. the sub-varsity teams are starting to grow. Youth softball plays there now. In the past, the JV softball has played there. I am very adamantly against moving up the basketball court toward closer to home plate and taking that hill. That field is just barely enough for JV softball. So JV softball uses it. Once in a great while, the freshman football go up there periodically, but also remember, it's heavily utilized by the after-school programs of the youth, as well as recreation, but I think it is used for school athletics, and potentially, if the varsity softball team goes to Filipello, again, there's a lot of, and they have enough women, they're going to have to play JV softball, so I'm not there. I don't like to lose any open space, but to me, and I wasn't at this Lowell meeting, the parking spots on Lower and Upper George Street make complete sense. And just thinking about it, I mean, sometimes people think these cars are going to go away with the flying cars. I mean, I really think that, especially with adding students, that you need to go on both sides on the side. But thank you. Thank you for asking me that question. Any other questions?
I could go on all day, Peter, but I won't, thank you.
Thank you. I'm leaving at 7, so that's a good thing for the committee. Thanks.
Any other comments from the committee? General public questions or comments? First, no.
Hi. I was at the meeting at the Lowell School. So a few things that I heard at the meeting I thought was interesting. I don't know if anybody has looked at as to the net change in parking requirements given the pre-K plans, because somebody pointed out some teachers and some parents are going to be going to Hosmer, and those parents are the ones that have the greatest requirement for parking spaces, so I think it's worth taking a closer look at that. The other one is, I don't know if there was any consideration given to the north side of Orchard Street, which would also help the traffic flow, or the DPW, which is about 50 yards away from the bottom corner of that picture. I don't know what the usage looks like at the DPW, but maybe 5-10 spots is worth considering. The other comment I heard from abutters, it sounded to me that a lot of the issues may be better served with some enforcement. It seems like in the morning sometimes it's kind of a free-for-all a little bit, and that's what creates a lot of the friction. And I will echo the comment made that I think the pickup times, the pickup and the events tend to be more challenging because it's less predictable. It's not like the clear 10 minutes in the morning and what do we do for those 10 minutes. So I think sometimes pickup and events tend to be the hardest for parking. So that's all I have.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Hygaz Markarian, and I live on Orchard Street, on Carlton Terrace. And I understand, you're doing a really good job to do the design with a 100-year-old building. But at the meeting at the Lowell School last week, there was a big concern about parking, and all the neighbors are complaining that there's not enough parking, and all the parents who are coming to pick up their kids, they're parking in front of their house, in front of their driveway, and it's not enough. So you're going to be taking away the parking from the school that's there now, and all the teachers are going to be parking on the street where it's going to be less parking now for the parents. So the design that's for the school, is there any way that could be a better design for the school? And early in about the Lowell School, you guys were talking about the front of the school being an historic school. In the meeting last week for the Lowell, nobody really complained about don't build from the front of the school out. Everybody was concerned about the parking and where people were going to park. And I live on Carlton Terrace, the last house next to the school. And I spent 5 years to get a permit to build a dormer on my house. It took me 5 years, back and forth. And I built my dormer. But I'm going to be looking at a school, a brick wall, okay? And the zoning there, I believe, is what, 36 feet high, right? And the school is going to take, it's not going to be 36. They're going to say, this is a special case, and it's going to go up to 50 feet high. And it's going to block the sun, my house. It's going to block the sun to my neighbor's house. Victor Lucas, he can't be here today because he's working. And my neighbor's house next to him. So the plan for this school should be designed a little bit better for the future of the kids, you know? Because 20 years ago, there was an addition built on the side where it was a loading dock. And we're here now 20 years later, and we want to build another addition. And in 20 years, we're going to build another addition. So this addition that you're spending $50 million on, and I understand it's ledge there, but for a few $100,000 extra, you can dig the ground with machines to take the ledge out and put a good-sized addition in the front and make the middle of the school a cafeteria or teacher's lobby or, you know, something in that case. And you could keep all the parking in the back, all the parking on the side, and everybody's happy, you know? I really don't think this is the right path we're taking by putting these additions on 4 sides of the school. And we're going to be back here in 20 years, you know? And we're going to be talking about an addition in front of the school. We're going to forget about the historic facade in the front. You could build the same facade in the front. And I know everybody here has concerns about the parking. This is not the right way we're doing this, you know? Like the Hosmer and the Cunniff, I understand it's, you know, it's the Cunniff especially, it's a small piece of land. But, you know, we don't want to get rid of the green, but we just need to do something right, okay? And there's spaces about the common areas. There's 2 common areas. Maybe we could take that space and make it into classrooms instead of keeping it as common spaces. Because kids really don't need a common space, especially if they're 5 to 10 years old. You know, they're going to be in school for 5 hours, 6 hours, half hour for lunch, half hour for recess, and 5 hours in class, you know? This is not a practical design, you know? And, you know, I really don't want to move out of this neighborhood. I've been here 25 years. But this is not right to block the sun, you know, from our street, you know? So I think you should reconsider the plan and maybe make something a little bit more predictable, you know, for the future. And if the budget's not there, you don't have to finish the whole thing. Finish what you need, and then whatever is left, keep it for 20 years.
Thank you. Again, we have not voted on any plan that's in, we listened, we're discussing, and we're still reviewing.
Yeah, you have to review it. You know, everybody has concerns.
Right.
I'm here from the neighborhood. Other people couldn't make it because they didn't know about this meeting.
Okay.
But if they did, they would be here.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brian?
Hi, Brian Hay-Bison. I live on Worcester Street, it's the other side of Orchard Street, and I wanted to, a little bit on the parking and Lowell, first as a parent who walked my child to the Lowell School for a number of years. I was curious about the ability to put parking on Orchard Street as well, partly because that seems like an underused resource, and partly because trying to walk across Orchard Street was death-defying for many years, and for the children, for the crossing guards who walked out in front of the traffic that was always driving 50 miles an hour down that street. And as has been discussed here, by making the streets narrower, it actually makes the streets safer. So I wonder about putting a lane of parking on that side would do two things, and it would add parking. It would also make the crossing for that, for the both at I guess that's Springfield, and the two crossing on both ends of there would be safer because it would be narrower lanes. So I'd like to hear what the possibility is of putting parking there. I also want to mention one of the things that somebody mentioned, I think in the Hosmer, that I don't think I brought up in this meeting, was the possibility of getting permit parking for the teachers and staff in the schools, to be able to park on the streets so that they wouldn't have to worry about the 2-hour limit, because that seemed like a really interesting possibility, and I don't know what the logistics of doing something like that would be. I think a big part of the year, we have the ban on parking anyway during the school year, and so part of that time, we don't have the ban, but for a big part of that time, we do have a ban on parking, so there wouldn't be any street parking for people to be already sort of on the streets when the teachers and the staff are coming to park on the streets, on the side streets. And the last thing I just wanted to say was that it seems to me, for the Lowell in particular, what I was hearing, people talked about parking, but what I heard more was they were talking about issues with the traffic flow and with drop-off and pickup, and the parking was ancillary to that, and actually they were more concerned about actually the parking making that worse by adding parking spaces. And so what I would be interested in is if it would make sense to do a more detailed traffic study based upon the feedback that people have been getting, to look at things like, I heard things about the fact that there were problems pulling onto Belmont Street for the traffic returning from the drop-off, and so the possibility of having possibly traffic directing policemen or some other type of ability to do traffic flow and, more enforcement, more ability to control the traffic so that it flowed more cleanly than the way it does now. So I think that maybe, because this is clearly a big problem, maybe a finer analysis and problem solving of what the traffic flow is, rather than just a brute force adding more parking. I'm not opposed to more parking, if that makes sense, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the best solution to what the problems that I'm hearing from going to the Lowell public meeting was. So that's just my input.
Thank you. Part of what you're discussing with permits, with Orchard Street, with police details and things, I know Councilor Picciarelli told me that the police were out there the last couple of days just standing there, I guess. So all of that stuff is out of our purview, unfortunately. We can bring it up to the Traffic Commission, we can bring it up to others, but that really, the School Building Committee isn't going to be able to say, we need parking permits for our teachers. That would be a traffic division and a Traffic Commission decision. And I would, it's been tried before, don't know where that would go. So there are some issues that are outside of the purview of this committee that we would have to consider while we're moving forward that we may not have anything to do with.
Sure, if you don't mind, I just would say that's certainly valid. On the other hand, I would hope that the town of Watertown would be able to work as a town and not be so compartmentalized that this committee couldn't work with the police department, which is under the same on the same town council and town manager as
It is, but it's a matter of different allocations of resources. It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
But again,
I understand it's not a
we
simple
understand your
solution, but
point.
it is,
Thank you.
it's not completely separate, so, yeah.
Elodia?
Olivia Thomas. I want to echo what Diego and Brian brought up with regard to once we move the preschool and pre-K to Hosmer, I think it will simplify things, but the biggest things that I heard, and I agree with you, Scott, we all hear different things, is that the drop and go really could be much more fluid and systematic than it is right now. I'm a little confused on the plan that you're showing because in my packet I have a different plan that says preferred schematic. And so I'm not sure what the preferred is at this point. Because do you know what I'm talking about, Scott? This one that looks like it has waves going up the hill?
I don't know what you're holding, I'm sorry.
This is labeled preferred schematic, not that one.
Got it. The,
I think the only difference is the parking.
right, the document that Elodia is referring to is the exact same layout for the building, Lowell Ave, everything is the same, except it was one of the evaluations we did for a parking variation, and so it shows the larger lower lot down in this zone off of George Street. So the preferred schematic refers to the building layout.
Okay.
We evaluated for the building committee a variety of different parking options on that preferred schematic.
And the other question I had, Stacy, I don't know if you can speak to it, but do people park in the Victory Field parking lot? Because that's empty most of the day.
I'm not aware of any of the teachers parking at
Because
Victory Field.
that's a hop, skip, and a jump away, and as one of the people at the Lowell meeting said, she has to walk 5/10 of a mile to get to her school building, so it's really just across the street. So all I would suggest is that we look at this a little bit closer, because I didn't think the neighborhood was too opposed to the parking. It was more the flow and a little bit more control. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Tom?
A couple of the public have mentioned about the possibly looking at the DPW site. I don't want to speak for the Public Works Superintendent, but I've been at many meetings over the years where he, and I've actually experienced it, when I've gone over to a meeting to the DPW site during the day and have not been able to find a parking space there between his staff and some of the staff in Town Hall who use town vehicles to perform their duties, and they've taken a town car and they've had to park their own car. So the space at the DPW site is a premium as far as it comes to parking, and I don't think that's a solution.
Thank you. So I talk about, so the Lowell School, that western addition, and could you maybe go to the slide that shows the floor plans? Just I think it's the next one, or maybe the next one. So that western addition, we're really just adding 2 classrooms on each floor and a set of bathrooms, right?
Hallway, too.
And that sort of that commons hallway, and then there's that little breakout space. So if you look at the first floor and second floor, for that whole addition, is basically we're adding 4 classrooms, and the 2 bathrooms, that common space, and that little breakout room. Is
That is, we're adding the 4 classrooms, 2 on the main level and 2 on the second floor.
And then that other, so that classroom in the front there, in the lower left corner, which is now being converted to, that's currently a classroom's being converted to a learning commons. Is that the
That is correct, Penny.
So my question is, speaking to the neighborhood, there's the 2 houses there at the end of Carlton Terrace. This is one of them. The existing corner of the building is like 8 feet from the property line. It's very close. And then this addition sort of blocks the entire end of the street. And I know it's within the 20-foot side setback, but is it possible to take that whole 2 classroom addition and slide it over and put it in front of the former classroom, which is now the Learning Commons. So if you think about, see right, so maybe move it over to that. Yep, move your cursor to the, see, yeah, move it over to sort of in that area and sort of bring it around so it doesn't impinge as close to the side of the property line. Because there are, if you look at the current building where that current classroom is, it's going to become the Learning Commons. There's a window in each of those classrooms, one on the first floor, one on the second floor.
That
But
is
those
correct.
windows are really in the closet that's there.
That is correct.
So they're not really a window. So if you were to move the two classrooms over, you wouldn't be blocking any of the windows into that learning common. And then maybe that space could be reconfigured, so if you were to go back maybe now to show the neighborhood view. So that whole, if you could see, you know, that whole new section there could maybe be just slid over and pull it away from sort of the neighborhood, sort of not make it seem as oppressive to the if you were to maybe, you know, if we were to take this, you know, right here, this is the piece, right? Maybe just slide it down and over so it actually comes over here. Maybe it even makes sense to turn these two classrooms around the other way. But, you know, sort of bring this, instead of being here, you know, if you could move it to here, you know, you can get it, instead of being 20 feet from the property line, you can get it 30 feet. So I guess that would be one of my questions.
Vinny, you need a microphone.
Sorry. So those are those, I'll go back because nobody can see me what I'm pointing at. So that would be, I guess, one thing I would ask if perhaps we could look at doing to provide some relief to the neighborhood.
Vinny, I do think that the slope towards the front of the school is much more dramatic than it is in the current location of that addition, just to throw that out there. I believe it's steeper the closer you get to the front of the building. And as, I mean, I know that nobody was talking about protecting the front of the building, but I think it's also because we didn't talk about changing the front of the building. I think as soon as you do, there'd be a whole lot more conversation in town about the front.
Except we wouldn't be really changing the whole front of the building, we'd just be moving it over to cover that one, sort of that one bumped out section. And right now, the lowest, if you look at the isobar, you know, the isobars of the slope, it's that little, the steepest part is right now where the lower corner of that new addition is, because even though it'll only be two floors, the sort of the foundation piece needs to be much bigger. So now it actually, to the neighbors, it actually presents as almost 3 stories because the bottom end is so low because the, you know, because of the way the steep. Anyway, so that would be one, in terms of addressing the concerns of the neighbors there, that would be one thing I would like maybe us to consider. I'm not sure that, you know, we could sort of just reduce in size a little bit the impact of that western addition. It just seemed, you know, for adding what's essentially 4 classrooms, it just seems like a really big chunk of addition to just add 4 classrooms. And if you think about removing the 1 classroom and converting it to Learning Commons, we're only essentially adding a net of 2 classrooms with that western addition. Well, it's actually, no, because we're removing a classroom, so it's actually a net addition of just.
Let's let Scott answer some questions here, because
Yeah.
I think that, I think that there are some, I mean, there's certainly some impacts associated with that, but I never, as architects, we never want to be resistant to exploring other possibilities. So I would say we'd certainly be willing to explore what the possibilities are there. I think that in thinking about the main facade of this building. And we have attempted to try to preserve that section between this corner, if you will, and this corner, because that's the original piece of the building, that's the original facade. It's perfectly symmetrical around a primary entry, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that before we would come across the front of this side and sort of create an imbalance in that original facade, we would explore whether it's possible to reduce this without making that kind of maneuver and pushing mass or new building construction in front of the existing very symmetrical facade. But in terms of attempting to try to reduce that, we're certainly willing to take a look at if there's a reconfiguration that would improve that.
That's fine. Yeah, and I just, we spent a lot of time with the Hosmer School redesign and moving it to try to address the concerns of the neighbors and the impact that the new building would have been. And that was across the street, not, this is actually right along the property line. So I think, and then when we looked at the Cunniff School, one of the designs we looked at was sort of building the new building behind the existing school. And we basically said, when we went out there and we looked at it, we abandoned it because it would have been a 3-story building, 20 feet from the backyards of those abutting properties. And, we said as a committee that that would be too much an imposition on the abutting neighbors. So I just, I want to just say, from a position of equity with this particular school, and I'm speaking sort of as the District C counselor now representing this neighborhood, I would like us as a committee to put that same level of care in terms of the imposition of the mass of the building on the abutting properties that we put at the Hosmer School and the Cunniff School, and see if we can't sort of mitigate this. The eastern addition, we didn't hear really any people complaining about the massing of that in the location. And that, of course, is on the other side of a street and an intersection, so it's a little bit more open space around it in terms of the abutting neighbors. But this one is like, literally right on people's yards. And the fact that, it's an uphill, Carlton Terrace, this is uphill from the houses. Even though it's only 2 stories, it seems like it's 3 stories, looming over those abutting neighborhoods. So I would just ask that, we sort of look at that. That would be number one. Number two, we heard a lot at all 3 of the schools about drop-off and traffic and, just sort of the basic traffic confusion at the schools. And of course, we need to maintain, people were complaining about the way it is today before we even put a shovel in the ground. So a lot of what we heard about traffic and drop-off and parking has to do with, doesn't actually have to do anything to do with the proposed renovations. And I think, we did hire a traffic consultant to sort of look at the traffic flow. I think once we, and I will just say this for the public, once we finalize a building design and move forward with the architectural design, that's going to take about a year. I really think we need to then look at the traffic flow around all 3 schools from a sort of a neighborhood high level, and also look at it in context of our local roadway projects. And just so people know, every December we sit down with the Public Works Committee and we look at the road projects we want to do next year. We're actually meeting next Tuesday, December 18th, to pick the road projects for next summer. I would think that we would want to look at, throughout next year, once the building designs are finished, maybe prioritize 1 summer's worth of road construction around the 3 elementary schools. Do we need to widen streets? Do we need to narrow streets? Do we need to do bump outs? Do we need to change some configurations of intersections? and do that in conjunction with the Traffic Commission, do it in conjunction with the school department and staff at each of the 3 schools, and say, can we come up with something that both addresses, the parking and the drop-off and pickup traffic, and maybe make some of those bolder, bigger changes in the 3 neighborhoods. And I would think that I would raise that at the December 18th Public Works Committee meeting, that for next year, you have a year to think about the streets around the 3 elementary schools. What can we do to make them better? So I would just want to offer that, and I think it was Diego or somebody said, we need to sort of look at the bigger picture. I think we will do that, and do that with a coordination through the Public Works Committee. So I just wanted to offer that to the team and to the public.
John?
I just had a question, and we may have talked about this and I simply forgotten, but is there a reason that, using it that way, if you look at the facade and then to the right you have that kind of gap space of the original building, was there a reason that you didn't look at kind of filling that in, basically, with classroom?
Only in that you've got a change in, you see the V there in the hallway, that's the change in elevation between the old building and the new building.
Yeah.
And so inserting any kind of space in that location, it has to engage 2 different floor levels on both levels. And so it becomes a little tricky to make it functional from the hallway side. And then it also is currently serving as an outdoor area for potentially the gardening program. And we certainly want to make use of it, but so far we've talked about it as outdoor academic use. But in any kind, in taking another look at the floor plan or any potential adjustments to the floor plan, we can look at that again.
Tom?
I just want to make one comment. Scott, I think you forgot about a comment or theme that we heard throughout all 3 meetings, was the excitement that the classrooms and all the renovations or additions and new portion of the buildings is going to bring to the kids.
That's very true, and if I was a good architect, I would have started with that level of excitement. There was a lot of enthusiasm, and every one of these neighborhoods knows that the goal of this building committee is to really transform these buildings into 21st century learning environments. And there was a lot of enthusiasm around that. And interestingly enough, because there was some concern expressed about things like traffic and drop-off, if you didn't go to these kinds of meetings on a regular basis, you might presume that that's negativity. But I would say, having been to these kinds of meetings for almost 30 years now, that the energy was very high and the support was very strong, and there was absolutely nobody who wasn't in full support of transforming all 3 of these sites into the best possible educational, community, and neighborhood sites for Watertown.
Any other comments? Anyone from the public? Yes.
So the back addition that you're putting on for the cafeteria, and then there's this, was that a janitor's room or something, or a gym and a couple other things? What if that back, what about the existing cafeteria be torn down and build a new cafeteria with a second-story addition for more classrooms above, and because you could like square it off to the existing school, and you're already doing construction back there, so it will be like a better designed addition, and maybe it'll look nicer.
Scott?
Yeah, keep in mind that the reason that space is located there from the time from the original building construction is because the preferred space for a dining space and a gathering space, and what will be the primary gathering space in the building, is to have it as a two-story volume. So it was set up there as a two-story volume. So when it already is almost 2 stories high, but it's to allow more volume, better acoustics, et cetera, for the dining space. If you were to, let's say, demolish that and build it as a 2-story space, but have it be 2 different floor levels, let's say you don't mind compromising the dining space and it becomes 1 story, still keep in mind on that second floor level, you've got a 2-story gymnasium completely blocking your opportunity for all natural light to anything that gets placed on that side of the building. So it would be challenging without demolishing essentially all the entire back of the building to kind of create 2-story volume, usable 2-story volume in that zone that you're describing.
What if you stagger the building a little bit? So the second floor will be higher than the gym, and the first floor will have that second, like 2-floor volume for the cafeteria.
To get above the gym, you would need, because it's essentially a 2-story.
No, I know.
You would need to get up to a 3rd floor level that really doesn't exist in the building right now. So there's no, right now, there's no
I
access.
think it's too much higher than what it is now compared to that building to the right. And then if you do go up on that side, you could transition the roof into the existing building, kind of like not a flat roof, but a little bit with a slope.
Again, I would say anything is certainly possible.
Yeah.
If you don't mind sort of demolishing off the entire rear of the building. When they planned the gym in this location, for example, they didn't plan for any further expansion in this area. If this was a blank slate in this area, we probably would organize it differently, and you could consider some of those possibilities. It would still require you to go up to a 3rd floor, which really doesn't exist in the building now. You have the lower level that's underneath this zone. I don't want to call it a basement level because it's completely walkout. Then you have the main level that we're on right here, and then you have a 2nd level. You don't yet have a 3rd level or a 3rd floor on this building.
Okay. Because the back parking is going to be, it's going to be closed off because of those additions that you're going to be putting. Maybe something else could be designed there for rooms, for classrooms, and instead of putting it on that, the west side of the school, you could move some of the classrooms back there. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else from the committee? Scott, anything else?
I think that I'm all set. Certainly, if there are any components of any one of those 3 that the building committee wants us to take a look at, certainly we work for you.
Well, we've had some conversations this evening, and I'm sure you will go back with your team and see if you can incorporate some new ideas here. Any other questions or comments? Okay, the next item is schedule and next steps, and I'm going to spend a few minutes here. Shane, if you could put up the cost sheet for me?
Yeah, I didn't bring that slide with me.
Oh, you didn't bring a slide? Okay. Okay, we went over these cost estimates at the last meeting. And they're significantly different than what was previously charged to this committee. The town manager had budgeted 80 to 120 based on some previous studies, and early on in the process with Scott and Shane, we've seen that those numbers probably weren't that realistic. We've gone through several iterations. We've gone to see, we can see what $130 million will buy, we can see what $190 million would buy, and right now, we're at about $153 million. I've told this committee several times that at some point, we would need to go to the town manager because this is an issue. So I sent this sheet to the town manager the morning after we got it, and we had a brief discussion about it. And the manager wanted to know how we got there, and so I set up a meeting with the manager and Scott and myself, and we went over some of what's involved here. The manager was not surprised, but, you know, we've had a subsequent discussion, a couple more discussions, one of them today, and what we're trying to accomplish here as a community is what's in the best interest of the community, and what are the goals that we're trying to reach. It's not always just about the money. So I asked Scott in between to do some analysis of what it would look like if we did, because at the Cunniff School in particular, and even at the Hosmer, we heard, can't we do a new building? Can't we do a new building? Can't we do a new building? So I asked Scott to take a look at what would 2 new buildings look like at the Hosmer and the Cunniff. And the delta between what we're presenting this evening at 153 and what 2 new schools would look like is significantly smaller than what people would expect. So I presented this to the town manager. We had another discussion today, as I said, and the manager has agreed that this committee should now take a step back and take a look at how to best proceed, and that is also going to include taking a look at putting 2 new buildings at the Hosmer and the Cunniff. That does a number of things. We now also have a new ordinance that says we have to have 50% of our roofs, solar panels on our roofs for over 10,000 square feet, so we have to do that. So again, an additional cost. We have a new LEED certifiability zoning ordinance that we passed last Tuesday night. Given all of those things, it makes sense for us to look at, and the manager agrees, that we need to look at doing the right thing. And I think, in my opinion, the right thing is the viability of 2 new schools, as we looked at, and Scott did a very preliminary projection, the dollar amounts 10 years from now, we're going to be looking at ourselves and kicking ourselves for not looking at this. We also have an opportunity to have these 2 buildings potentially become net zero buildings. You can't do that when you're doing old buildings. So the benefits of that, the long-term sustainability, the costs that would be recouped by doing net zero buildings, they all make sense. We all, I believe, would like to achieve those goals. So I'm asking, and I'm telling the community that I've asked Scott for our next meeting to prepare what 2 new buildings on these sites would look like, and to come up with some updated costs. There are some savings by doing new buildings. Contingencies might be a little bit less. You may not have as many change orders, but the other benefits to that are the maintenance that would come, that's going to come a lot later than it would come possibly with some of the renovations that we're doing to our schools. And I'm just going to ask Scott to quickly touch on the benefits of a new building versus what we would be doing with partial new and partial renovation. And I don't want to spend a lot of time because we're going to be talking about this at our next meeting in detail, but I do think that the committee and the community need to understand some of the thinking here.
that's a lot to absorb and a lot to talk about. I think that if the town we've talked a lot about the town manager and the council ultimately knowing financially what is affordable. And so I would say that if it is determined that through the town manager and town council that a project, the funds are available to do something in the order of what's been presented or something more than that, a number of doors would be opened, so many that I'll probably forget some of them because I didn't prepare any remarks. But we've talked repeatedly about the limitations of the existing buildings. When we talked about Cuniff and we talked about Hosmer, and we've said we're going to make them amazing and make them amazing within the confines of what we're keeping there. But certainly we've repeatedly said that there are limitations with regard to how green and sustainable the buildings can be and how energy efficient they can be if we have to maintain significant portions of those existing buildings. We can't insulate the existing walls, the existing roofs, the existing construction enough to sort of make a difference. So on the energy efficiency side, on the sustainability side, on the green side, the possibility of new construction at the Cuniff and the Hosmer may, open doors that we really haven't talked about in a while now because we've been working thinking we were going to be keeping a portion of those existing buildings. At the Hosmer specifically, it seems like this building committee has pointed out on a number of occasions that if we had the possibility to clean the slate, if you will, on that site, that we would do something very different. We would do something that takes up less field space. We would do something that's organized more efficiently. We would do something that has a smaller building footprint. We would do something that improves the site circulation and drop-off there. So without knowing specifically what that is, we know that once you have a clean slate there, there are a lot of doors that get open. So that certainly would be, a significant bonus. On something like the Cuniff, we know that the neighborhood was thoughtful enough to look at that plan and realize that if we didn't have a 54 building, a 96 building, and a 2019 building, that the building that we would put on the site would likely be organized in a very different fashion and located in a different location. And one of the things that occurs to me is when we were first talking about the Cuniff months ago, we never thought about it, when we thought about it as new construction, we thought about it as a very complex project because we assumed that the students would have to remain on site while that new construction was taking place, and therefore we would be limited in terms of where we could place a new building. However, as you know, since that time, we've talked about the fact that the Hosmer could now be a swing space for new construction, and that does kind of change the way we would look at the Cuniff site if we were studying new construction options on that site. So those are certainly some of the things. I think that if we looked at options for all new construction on those two sites, we can go a long way towards potentially satisfying those that continue to wave the banner for the big preservation of green space, maximizing the green space. I know that there would, there would be, we've done the very best we could at both Cuniff and Hosmer in presenting an educational layout that's functionally successful, organizationally successful, and that really raises the bar in terms of the educational environments. But we know that if we had a completely clean slate at those sites, it would be interesting to see what would be created in that realm too. So I think that if, you know, if the building committee does want us to take a quick look at that, I would suggest that we certainly couldn't come back in short order with, you know, all new building designs and, you know, perfect solution, et cetera, but we could certainly come back and talk about what might be possible and what the advantages of that would be. And then working with Daedalus, we could take a look at what the cost of that would be, because it is true that when we were considering as an outside possibility new construction in the past, it's when we were doing a lot of renovation and a lot less work. And as we've continued to do more new construction, for example, at the Hosmer, more new construction at the Cuniff, and a greater level of renovation at both of those buildings than we originally started with, we certainly are getting closer and closer to that number that would just represent new construction. We'll need to look at the phasing and how those would be executed phasing-wise and what the impact of that is, and a number of other factors, but it definitely opens a lot of doors.
And again, I can't emphasize enough that we heard at every one of these places about the open space. And this would really significantly, it would be a net gain, if I'm not mistaken, in most of these, in both of these schools. So again, it's a very fluid process, but I do believe that we have to look at this step, and the manager has agreed that this is a step that we really should be looking at. So any comments on Lindsay?
One is that I think a big moment that we had in this committee was about phasing, when it was determined that we could use the existing Hosmer building as a swing space, which means that if you're going to put a brand-new building in some optimal location on the Hosmer site, you may completely lose the ability to have two coexisting schools on site. And so I think that there could be some really interesting issues pop up with this idea of new construction, but that was just one thing I was thinking about. The other thing I'm just a little concerned about is, and I don't mean any disrespect for the process, it's kind of hard to figure out how to say it, but I'm really worried about chasing something that's not going to be possible. Like, I'm worried about really feeling the pressure in this committee for months now about the finances, and now kind of being told we have an open end and let's spend time on that. I'm just a little worried about chasing it and how realistic it is.
Let me just explain.
Yeah.
The number we're looking at is 153 plus.
Yeah.
The numbers that Scott ran for me and the town manager are numbers that we all feel the community needs to look at, because they are, the manager, for the manager to agree, he believes that they may be achievable.
Okay,
What we've actually looked at is including modular classrooms.
okay.
So
Thank you.
we've gone, Scott and I have been very detailed of what was presented to the manager. I wouldn't be here tonight if I hadn't done the work with the manager who controls the finances, which will then still have to be voted on by the town council. Scott knows, we had a conversation this afternoon, there is a limit. And I told him this afternoon, and I think he will agree, that if it's $1 more than what we're talking about, we had a real long conversation about, is this achievable? And he believes it is. I don't know
Sure.
that aspect, but I have to trust that he has done enough work to get us to this point for me to present that to the manager,
Yeah.
that it's more realistic that we could, I don't want to say 100% that the council is going to approve this, the funding, but I wouldn't be sitting here this evening presenting this option if the financing part of it hasn't been cleared from the chief executive of the community.
Sure, just those few details in that 3 minutes makes me feel a lot better about spending the time on it, that's also, thank you.
I should have said that in the beginning. I don't want to, we've had some very detailed discussions.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, just to Lindsay's first point, when Mark asked us about this as a possibility, we do feel strongly that the Hosmer would have to remain as a swing space. So when I say clean slate, I don't mean completely removing everything on the side. I think in order to make all three of these projects viable, we have to think about leaving the Z-shaped building throughout the duration of the process as swing space.
Dee Dee?
I certainly just want to say that I'm very pleased about having the options to reconsider some of the thoughts of having new buildings. And it really speaks a lot to the work that we did in our visioning sessions and the goals that we had set in terms of what we would like for our buildings. And I think in the spring, we reconciled ourselves to the fact that we were going to get excellent buildings, but it wasn't going to achieve maybe necessarily everything that we were looking for. So having that thought that we could achieve many of those goals and priorities, it gives me a great sense of optimism, and certainly I could see how this is going to tremendously impact our students. So I'm pleased to be moving forward with that further look.
John?
Yeah, just briefly, I echo the superintendent that it's exciting to look at this option, and I know, we have a ways to go in terms of whether this will work, but, these are very much long-term investments, and on the education side, to have two new buildings rather than try to mix and match with existing structure, I think creates some great opportunities for the educational space, and certainly on the sustainability side and the long-term maintenance, et cetera, for the building itself. This is a much better way to go for the town in the long term. So, look forward to looking at these options.
Laurie?
I'm actually going to be the naysayer here, although, like Lindsay, I appreciate the process, but it does concern me that we are saying that we're not setting timelines, and we could be going around in circles for years, and we are planning projects with the knowledge that this is moving forward, projects for these schools right now that this could jeopardize, and although we're looking at increased cost for new construction and that, but time in this process is also money for a lot of different aspects. So I just wanted to go on the record saying that. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none. Community Outreach Group. Vinnie?
Thank you. So I had asked Christine, who works at Daedalus, to take all the email addresses we got from everybody who attended the 3 community forums and enter them in the database so we could start sending out email notifications. And she did tell me today that she got all the emails loaded in the system, but she has not yet created a template for sending out email notifications for future meetings. I'm hoping we can do that before the next meeting so we can start blasting out things. And so that's where we're at.
Thank you. High school update.
Well, we had excellent news about our high school project. We are on the agenda for the December 12th board, the MSBA board, in terms of being an action item to be recommended for an invitation into the feasibility phase. So we're very excited about that. It's makes it very real, and that's the news on the high school project at this point in time.
A review of invoices. I don't think we have any invoices at this point. New business. I just want to say that we have created a sustainability committee, and John Ports is going to be the chair. Laurie Cable is going to be on the committee, and Sean O'Hearn will be on the committee. John will work with Scott and set up any meetings that are necessary. I do believe that if we go with 2 new buildings, your job got a little bit easier. So the challenges won't be as significant, maybe. So I do think that, there are some other possibilities. Any other new business?
Yes.
Yes, Dee Dee.
Sorry. Now that hopefully we will be invited into feasibility, I think probably at the next meeting, we should discuss how it is that we're going to go about putting together the RFS for the OPM. So I think it's just an agenda item.
We'll do that at the end of the meeting so that they don't have to be,
Yes.
they can't be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Any other new business? The next school building committee is tentatively going to be January 2nd. Tentatively. We have very, short weeks for holidays and lots of vacations, so, and Scott needs a little bit of time in between to revise. Pardon me?
You've got a couple things to do.
Yeah. Yes.
Took me a second to kind of form my thoughts. It was kind of a bombshell you dropped there. I just wanted to say, I think you put up a lot of negative feedback in these meetings, and I'd like to give you some positive feedback. Don't know how this is going to work out in terms of this alternate path, but I think having the vision to take a step back and say, this is something that's going to be in place for, I don't know how these buildings, 50, 75, 100 years?
50 years.
50 years, hopefully, right?
Vinny will still be here.
That we'll probably all still be here in the same meeting, but the fact that time, this can seem like a long process to go through, but the fact that for 50 years these buildings will be there, that people will look back and will appreciate the time that was spent to do this right, and whatever right may mean, whether it's new buildings or whether it's renovations. I think sometimes taking the extra little bit of time, though it may be painful at the time, can be really rewarding in the longer term. And I remember discussions that people had about the Hosmer and saying the renovations that were done there, what were people thinking? Like, they look really bad now. And it's not to say that it was a bad decision at the time, but I'm just saying that I think it's a strong move to do this. So I appreciate the visionariness.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Before Brian leaves, I just want to say 50 years from now, my head will be mounted on a robot. So I still may be here, but...
Our students will create in their exciting environments.
So my work background is plumbing and heating, and what you said about knocking the schools down and building, that's the greatest idea to do that. When you start trying to save something, it's going to cost you more to save it. I work for one of the best heating companies out there right now, and I walk into these jobs that are horrendous. People take advantage of people, and they just take their money, and we're stuck with it, And people say, I just spent $15,000, and I need to spend another $5,000. And when somebody puts a high-efficiency boiler in their house, that doesn't mean they're going to save money. You need to have new windows, new insulation. That's the key things to save money. And if you think you're going to save money on high-efficiency boiler, you're not. The key thing is to have good windows and good insulation. When you do the job right, you're going to be all set for 30 years. The school is going to be there for 100 years, and it's going to be our tax money that's going to be going to these schools that we're going to benefit. We're not going to be spending money another 50 years to put an addition. You already did it. This is the path we need to go. We need to build the right buildings for Watertown. Because this town is a town, but people are going to be moving in. It's called small-time living. They're going to be living in small apartments, and they're going to have kids, and all these kids are going to go to these schools. We need to think about the future. The next 100 years is a big thing, okay? And we need to build these schools the right way and even for expansion, you know? So the right thing is to build new schools, not to chop these schools up and add a piece here and a piece there. You're just wasting money, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would just like to express my absolute joy.
Go back to the microphone.
But yeah,
You're okay. I'd just like to express my absolute joy that you have taken this thoughtful step to look back this vision, and I think it's going to be great for the children, too. In the next 50 years, we've had 2 climate reports, one from the UN, one from the federal government, saying in the next 20 years even, we're going to have huge climate changes. And if our schools can help to adjust to that, to lead in that, it will be great for the school, for the kids as well as the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.